Well, good morning, everybody. Major Andy Bowne. I'm going to go ahead and introduce and bring the rest of the panel up here. So, gentlemen, we'll go ahead and have Captain Michael Kanaan come on up. And next we'll have Lieutenant Colonel Eric Frahm. And we'll have Mr. Tony Sanchez. And Mr. Matt Tarascio. All right, gentlemen, well, it is my honor to be here. I think this is going to be a fantastic panel. There is a great amount of experience and perspectives that we have that we're going to be able to share with you this morning. I'm Andy Bowne. I was introduced as an associate professor at the Army Judge Advocates General School. That, unfortunately, I'm not that anymore. I just PCS and starting at Vandenberg Air Force Base. But I was with the Army for 3 years, and the Army is all about MDO right now. They have been pretty much the whole time I was with them. So much so that they started a new command in Austin, a 4-star command, Army Futures Command. I always joked with them, it's essentially the Air Forceification of the Army. But they're doing some really interesting things right there, and we have AFWERX that is in the same building with them as well. So there's a lot, and it's not just multi-domain from an Air Force perspective, but from a DoD. I was able to see that a lot in my time with the Army. So I am an attorney. I'm a lawyer, and so far I think the kindest thing that anybody has said about lawyers in this conference is what Beam said this morning, that basically trying to convince you all that sometimes we're necessary. And so I'll be hopefully operating one of those times right now where I'm necessary. And so my job today is as an attorney, as a PhD candidate, I'm a professional question asker. And so that's what I'm going to do today, ask questions of this esteemed panel. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is turn it over to my colleagues here. And start off with Mike and ask him what factors does the Air Force need to consider in order to leverage artificial intelligence in multi-domain operations?
So attorneys are important on this conversation.
That's right.
And we'll address that momentarily. But I think of the world, and I think this could canvas the conversations we need to have on AI. AI in itself is a chicken and the egg problem all the time, right? Where do I begin? Where do I stop? And it never ends. So what we've thought about is thinking through the world through pragmatic principles, right? Taking a page from Ray Dalio, and how do we address these things? So principle 1, drive down technological barriers to entry. Unclassified does not mean unsecure. And I think this is a profound shift that we need to make in the manner in which we write our contracts, recognize the things that are valuable, and make sure that we are effectively teaming with the commercial market that leads in artificial intelligence. There's no question about that. We need to make it easier to operate, not looking at the world through, AOL, America Online disks that we install our computers or something like that. Number 2, treat data as a strategic asset. If we did that, I think you would see the ways in which we were digitizing our workflows, connecting to the people we need to connect with, and then measuring data. It's kind of like this. We used to ask the question, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? In 2019, the answer is, of course it did. But is there something there to measure and record it? Number 3, democratize access to AI solutions. What are the types of things you would change with the minutia in your life to automate the process? That's all we're talking about here. And not choosing edge cases, right? Difficult problems that are only bespoke or unique to us. We would start leveling the playing field of support equals operations. Not a profit company. If you drive down the costs on one end, you can take care of the other end. Number 4 is upskilling and valuing our workforce. So this is demonstrated through the Computer Language Initiative. where we will treat foreign languages, aptitude, proficiency, the way we value it, the ability to communicate, the same. Arabic and Python should be treated equally in the Department of Defense, period. Right? These are the operative languages of our time. Once upon a time, I feel like there are people in this room who remember the days when we taught people to type in the United States Air Force. It's time to do that again with coding and programming. And then lastly, the transparent conversation about the ethics, lawful, and moral effects of artificial intelligence. Look, it's just another tool right now. Nothing has characteristically changed. But at the same time, we should be leading that conversation. And I implore every single person in this room, every single American, to communicate daily about how they view our human dignities in line with Western society, because this will be the conversations of our time.
So, Mike, well said as always. You took most of my stuff. I think that the thing that we need to concentrate on as we build off of all of those foundational points is building in that human-machine team where we, as the human side of that, understand at a deep and fundamental level how the AI is functioning, what its strengths and weaknesses are, how it's likely to be faked out, and doing it all in a way that we are becoming kind of a fused whole with these systems. Just the same way as today, when we take off in an aircraft, we expect our pilots to understand at a deep level how the engines are functioning, how the electrical system functions, and how they interrelate. We need to understand the same thing about the data flows that are being presented to us and the analysis that's being conducted when it's automated, to understand that these are not decisions that are being presented to us that we just have to act upon. There is an expectation that there's a layer of judgment that's going to be applied. So I think that's the first thing we need to do. But I think that's the primary thing we need to do. The first thing we need to do, though, is begin by building out that skill set within our force. The reality is that we do not have an IT infrastructure today that can support this. We do not have a procurement system that will act on it at a meaningful or relevant speed. We don't have the people who can understand it enough to work with a contractor or a vendor to get it built in the way that actually serves our purposes. And so what we've been concentrating on at Air Education Training Command has been to partner with the Cultural Language Initiative, the Computer Language Initiative, to start getting at how do we actually train people to understand this stuff and to start building it a little bit on their own. I don't think that in the end of the day here, we're going to have people building major software components inside the Air Force, but I do believe that we will have people connecting different components together at the API level, maybe building some small applications that take advantage of a data flow that exists or that we've created on our own. So it'll be kind of nibbling along the edges for a while, but what we're doing, and we should recognize, is we're building the reps, we're building the skill set, and we're building the leaders who are going to understand this and take it forward in the next 5 to 10 years.
Great, thank you. As a past imagery analyst, Intel analyst, I will say that in the multi-domain environment, you're not only dealing with geospatial data, you're dealing with all data. And so from the perspective of how do we bring this into an organization, working in the commercial space, developing systems, the first question I always ask is, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with AI? How is that going to impact what I do? So from an analyst perspective is, I don't necessarily need to know the details. I need to know how this technology is going to help me. And so I always talk about, when I talk to organizations, look, if you're going to invest in AI, invest in your infrastructure. Because AI is changing continuously. It doesn't behave like traditional software such that you just install it, it just works. AI is very touchy, there's lots of training involved. Algorithms change very quickly. So how are you going to keep up if the mission changes? So really think about how you set up your infrastructure so you can change on a dime if your mission changes. From a tool perspective, and maybe this is the third point, is really figuring out, how do we simplify what these tools will do for me? Again, It's, I don't want to learn something new. I always look at it this way. Your AI is only as good as the tools that you wrap around it. And essentially, it should essentially be invisible. It should just work. It should tell me, this is where you need to look next. And so think about from a usability standpoint, the simplification of how you bring in this technology, how do you keep up with the technology, and how you do that effectively from a cost, performance, and time perspective.
So it's good to go last because there's been some great comments, and I don't think there's anything that I could say that is unique. But what I will say is that I think there's a couple of things that I think are absolutely key, and it's been mentioned, but obviously the data is key, talent, and really what it comes down to is there's a big difference between deploying an algorithm in a digital environment, say on a computer, versus deploying it out on the edge and at scale and into programs of record. And that's where I think that if you do well on the data and the talent and other areas, you can actually make a meaningful difference. And so one of the things I think we have to really be focused on is branding what we do as super cool and super exciting. That's how we attract the talent. If you want to go and work on a cell phone at a tech company, that's great. I use cell phones all the time. I think that's wonderful. But we work on jets. We work on stuff that is really cool, right? So attracting the talent through what we do and how meaningful it is, I think is really key. And I think that's going to help us attract the talent that we need to push this forward. And then the other thing on data, we talk about how we need lots and lots of data. But I think more importantly, we need the right type of data. We can get a lot of data that doesn't really help the algorithms to generalize. And if it can't do that, then what you've done is trained an algorithm to be pretty useless out in the field. And so I think it's the right types of data when we talk about big data that's important too. And that helps us to scale up these algorithms. And then I think you mentioned trust. Trust is a big one too, right? Making sure that we deploy robust solutions that not only address ethics, but allow us to interface with humans and machines so that the humans trust the algorithm and understand that it's going to make a good decision and that you can trust it when the timescales are very low and you have to make a rapid decision.
All right, thank you, panel. So a lot of great topics that were brought up, and the one word that I'll hit on and ask some follow-ups that both Colonel Frahm and Matt brought up was on the concept of trust within this concept of artificial intelligence in MDO. And so to the panel, what are your concerns, if any, on emerging threats like deep fakes and spoofing that could come up in this context? And how can we deal with those?
Right, we're talking about technology that's inherently dual use. The word deepfake, right, freaks us out right now, and it is a concern that we need to have, but not the conversation where we don't drive at the level of technology that drives deepfakes, right? It's just an application of artificial intelligence, and it is beneficial also at the same time. So the ubiquity of AI is a concern that we have to address. So what do we do about that? We build in a level of technological appreciation for the process. I think too often we are communicating above, below, past, through one another when we're largely saying the same things. So that calls for a relationship that we need to reinvigorate. And that comes from speaking the same languages, talking about the same things. So is it a concern? Absolutely. We live in a world where the data in which we are operating with, we have to trust fully through the entirety of the process. Could you imagine a world where the Air Force is operating, where the models we're generating, we either don't trust the models or don't trust where that data came from, like the well was poisoned? This is a critical conversation at this point in time, but we have to understand the entirety of the process. Deep fakes are a technique At the end of the day, we have to know when it is bad, and we have to know when it is beneficial for us as well.
So I think that if I can characterize Mike's comments, I think what he's talking about there is we have to have trust in the data at the source, at the beginning of that Nile. I think we also have to have an explanation of how we got to the conclusions being presented to us, and that we understand the amount of error that's involved in reaching that conclusion, and therefore the amount of error that's involved in the decision that can come from it. So I think explainable AI versus these deep ML types approaches where we don't necessarily understand the process by which we got from A to B. The deep ML can get us some really great insights that we would not get any other way. But man, for every one that gets thrown out there as a conclusion, there's 20 that are terrible. And what's the website? It's something like specious correlations or something like that. There's a good website out there you guys can Google. But so there's going to be this interplay over the next several years to decades as we get better and better at AI between this explainability versus these deep insights. And we're going to have to sit there and play at that to figure out, is this the right answer and what's the right balance for this particular situation? And again, it's going to come back to the other AI, the actual intelligence, the human who's going to have to be there to interpret it.
And I'll tag on what these gentlemen talked about with deepfakes. Really, that's just a focal point of AI. It's just one path that really smart folks are working on to combat. I think about it from, again, coming from the analyst perspective, is a lot of what I do is also demystify AI. It's not magic. It just doesn't work out of the box. So we often forget we don't talk a lot about the training aspect. You have to tell it what to do, what to look for. And that involves a lot of effort, a lot of work up front. So really, it's about how do we make tools, how do we integrate new tools with existing workflows that make that process simpler. If you're doing analytics, if you're doing product development and you're making decisions every day, how do we work in those decisions into the training process? How do we validate that process? And how do we feed that back through the whole loop so that our system gets smarter and smarter over time? So really, it really depends on your ultimate goal for the day, whether it's discovering deepfakes or creating new workflows that shift my time from being a robot to just look at data and extract objects and what's happening in imagery to more of a validator, where I have a system that tells me you need to look here first. Now I'm able to 10x my workflow and focus on high priority data that my system says is really important, and I'm able to make decisions much, much faster.
Yeah, and just protecting the data is obviously key. If we can protect our data sets, I think that's a big leap forward. Real-time learning is the challenge. If you're learning in real time, how do you protect that data? And I think that's a big challenge. I saw the inventor of GANs, Goodfellow, do a speech at, I think it was the AAAI conference earlier this year, and he showed a video of it was a gentleman who was an engineer and a geek like myself, who definitely couldn't dance. And they used GANs to prove that he could dance really, really well. There is no way, because I went to school with these guys, that any of us can dance that well. So it is a little scary about how it can be used. And at the same time, I think we can use it against our adversaries to learn and be able to fake them and trick them. So I think it's important. The one thing I did want to touch on with respect to trust and explainable AI, I think we absolutely have to understand how an algorithm came up with the decision that it came up with. But one thing I think we have to be cautious of is that algorithms are designed to do things differently than the way our brains work. And so by picking features and edges and other things, it can be extremely difficult to understand why an algorithm made a decision. And so we have to obviously infer as to why it did that. But what I don't want to do is go so far down that track that we don't, that we kind of constrain the expressiveness of some of these algorithms in finding things that we haven't thought of. And I think that's the balance we have to strike, right?
One quick follow-on for that, and I think that is such a critical point. Look, everyone in this room knows they're sitting on a chair. How do you know that, right, on this topic of explainability, right? You would probably say, well, based on my experience for X number of years, I've seen a lot of chairs and I see what's not chairs and I see what they do on them. AI would tell you the same thing. It would say, based on the experience in which you provided me, i.e. the data set, I think that is a chair, right? So please don't send us into another AI winter by broadening the goalposts, kicking that conversation down the road, because DARPA is going to solve explainable AI for us when humans can't explain how they make decisions anyways, right? And then to say, does that data set represent a fair worldview for its use case? If we could transition to that, I think we could iteratively develop to get to the harder conversations at the end of the day.
All right, so I think we'll probably have my last question, but I'll go ahead and direct it to the industry side of the room, because one of the issues that we've heard quite a bit about is, even though we're talking about MDO, a lot of the technologies are dual use, and so a lot of what we're going to be doing is working with industry for this. And so I wanted to direct the question towards the industry side, and hopefully have some room for rebuttal on the Air Force side of the house. Is what is the importance and what degree of collaboration is really necessary for the Air Force to fully leverage AI and probably with commercial roots AI in order to achieve the strategic goals in MDO?
Yeah. So that's a really good point, is how do we make this happen? From a company standpoint, as we're driving towards general intelligence, right, as the sort of the space races, how do we get there? We don't believe any one company or any one organization is going to solve that. It's going to be a collective effort, right? Whether it's academia or through the commercial sources, how do we all work together to achieve these many goals, right? So it's really about, how do we bring the technology to you? How do we make it accessible? We focus on, what is that management layer? We're observing the market right now, and it is exploding with these, we call them AI engines. They're just exploding on the market. Prices are dropping, accuracy is getting better. So the challenge is, how do we leverage that? And so we've carved out our spaces. We've developed a management layer so we can take best of breed, get accuracy up, and get breadth in your AI, in your capabilities. That's one way to do it. There are many different ways. But it's really, how do we work with the Air Force? How do we get the technology into their hands? So leveraging open source, being able to connect to the tools they already use today, but also the other way around. Help us get data. Help us do the training. Help us get, it doesn't have to be classified, but help us get there. Help us help you, and help us sort of maintain that relationship.
Yeah, so that's great. Multi-int data sets. That would be brilliant. But I think, and that's challenging to collect that information and have it all synchronized. And so I think working together in that area is important. And obviously working together across the broader community is key, because no one organization has the talent to be able to push this forward. So, generalized AI maybe is out there at some point. I truly believe that. But we just don't have the talent. And so I think we have to tap into multiple organizations. And I think one of the things I was talking about earlier about inspiring that generation to get into this area, one of the things we did was we launched a program called Alpha Pilot, which was a competition, $2 million prize with the Drone Racing League and NVIDIA to see who could beat a human Drone Racing League pilot. And if you can beat them, you win a big prize. I think more competitions like that. I think partnerships with the Air Force. I know that TA1 of Air Combat Evolution has a similar kind of theme. I think that's fantastic. I think that's going to help us bring in talent. The other thing, national mission initiatives like the Hatter mission is a way that we can tap into universities and potentially foreign nationals and others to bring that best of breed talent together, so that we can leverage that capability. Making data sets available, I think, is important. We have to be obviously cautious about what type of data we make available. And then the last thing I'll say is, and we talked about this earlier, was FOSS software in a classified environment. I think that's an industry, Air Force challenge. How do we do that seamlessly? At the moment, we bring in some software. It takes us a year to certify, and there's 3 versions that have been rolled since then. So that's a challenge that I think we can work on together as well.
So I think that one of the things we've done at Air Education Training Command is we've made a series of small bets that have paid off a little bit. Here's a little bit bigger bet. Here's a little bit bigger bet. We're getting to the place where some of our AI efforts are getting to be fairly significant bets, and especially if you look backwards at the amount of money we put in, it's starting to spread across multiple career fields, and yet it's still nascent enough that we're sitting here saying, are we on the right path? And we look around, we don't have the expertise to evaluate that. And the vendors that we've been working with, we love them, they've been doing great work, but they're not exactly neutral to say, gee, this is the wrong path. Actually, I've been doing this wrong all this time. So that's where we're looking to bring in academia, frankly, and say, hey, look at this from the ground up, and just tell us, based on your broad knowledge of the AI field, are these the approaches we should be taking? What other approaches should we be mixing in here? Because I don't think it's well, you should have done A, not B. I think it's how do you mix A and B together? Back to the explainable piece. How do you test the assumptions that validate these algorithms? Those are the problems that we're wrestling with right now. And I think that, yes, having open APIs, if not open source, is critical. Having vendors who are willing to work with academics as we are figuring this out, even potentially at the expense of their contract. I mean, that's a big ask. I recognize that. But frankly, the people we're looking to work with are the folks that are confident enough in their approaches and in their work that they're willing to withstand the scrutiny of somebody else coming in and looking at it. And that to us is an ideal vendor. A lot of this is revolving around the things that AFWERX is bringing to the table. The SIBR program, you get accepted to the SIBR program, now you're a government vendor. You have access to the data if we can give it to you. So, but how do I get access to a data set and turn it over is still a problem.
So I think rounding this out, right, it's back to principle 1, driving down technological barriers to entry and signaling to the commercial sector that we are open for business in relevant manners and relevant ways. Too often, our vendors are taking risk with time, people, unique, bespoke delivery and deployment methods, when otherwise you can solve that with things like Docker, Kubernetes. I mean, these are like words that matter to industry. But at the end of the day, I do believe in a new manner and a new way of sharing, because we have the best people working on the hardest problems that our society and our world will face, with hopefully the best technologies for someone somewhere else. There's your value proposition. And we have to demonstrate that and make it easy to team in ways that will change the character of our world for the next 30 or 40 years.
All right, well, thank you very much, panel. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Obviously, there's a lot to think about in this domain and how the Air Force is going to leverage AI, both on the commercial side, both in the house. So gentlemen, thank you very much. And AFWERX, thank you for putting this panel together. Thank you.